Okay, so in the last demo, I showed you how I aligned. I used the computer aligned stack, and I found a way to mask the animation and played the timeline through. And you can see how it keeps that rod right in the same place every time. And it keeps it all pretty even. I'm pretty happy with how it aligned it. These are just my full exposures, not aligned. I don't know why there are so many layers of my tripod still. There we go. I don't need any of these layers, so even before I make them into frames, I'll just delete those layers. Okay, now I'm going to create a frame animation. Same steps. I'm going to make frames from layers. Let's go ahead and select them all, set them to be half a second, and change it to reverse the order of the frame. So it goes from my first exposure to my last, play it through forever. Let's see how this does. And that looks pretty even as well. You can see that every once in a while, the tripod just shifts a little bit when I had to readjust things on it. Then when the light changed outside, it got a little brighter and then dimmer and then brighter when the sun broke through. And so there's just tiny little bibble bobbles happening. So what do? I create a new layer on top of everything, and I'm going to find how I want to crop it. I should go to the image where the object I'm showing the transformation of is largest. And I'm just trying to avoid that little top of the tripod there. So that's basically the cropping I want. Let's see if that's actually a square. I hold down Shift. Yep, not quite. All right, so deselect. I need to start a little bit further back. Yeah, that's pretty good. And then I can nudge it over. Let's do that. So now I say select inverse. So it's not selecting inside the square, instead it's selecting outside of the square. I'm on this new blank layer on the top, which is going to play across all of my different frames. And I say edit fill with black, normal 100%. Now let's play it through. And I can see that the tripod starts to, throughout the animation, to slightly move to the right, slowly, slowly. And jiggle around a little bit until ending up at the center. All right, so I need to choose. Do I want that one, or do I want the one where the computer aligned it so that the tripod never moves? Even though it might distort some of the documentation. I actually think I like this one better. So how could I fix this one though? Because often we're in this case. So I go through with the animation and I see where it starts to move a little bit. You see there? It's just shimmying a little bit. So what do? Well, first I select all my frames and I drag them down to the trash. And what I do is I find them in the layers. In fact, I can turn off timeline so it doesn't interfere. And I'll take this first layer and I'll turn it down to 50% opacity, and I'll turn on the layer behind it. And that one lines up nicely, right? But the next one, you see how it shifts just a tiny bit. And this is why I haven't cropped it yet. So what I can do is take that layer, use the move tool, and just nudge it on top. Next layer. Use the move tool, just nudge it on top. So I have that nice marker. Nudge it on top. And this is a pain, but this is simply using the benefit of cropping. It's kind of like having X-ray vision, right? Because I have the extra area of the exposure, even if my camera wandered a little bit, I can line these all up by hand without distorting them. And I'm just using the arrow keys. In the history it will say nudge, because you're just moving them tiny little degrees. And the more you're zoomed in, the smaller those movements can be. Oops. You want to make sure you're on the layer you're affecting, though, while you're doing that. So now all those line up really well. And this was even shot with a tripod. But things happen as you're changing it, as you're adding new things, as you're putting weight on it, as you're having to kind of work with the object. Or maybe you're shooting a parrot and it keeps pecking at your tripod and moving it. So these are the techniques you need to know as a photographer. Now, there's a big difference between shooting handheld and using a tripod. If I was shooting handheld, I'd have to rotate each one and move them probably a lot more than this to get them all to line up. Now, sometimes what you line up is in the background. What professional photographers will do is they'll shoot with like a grid behind or some sort of markers that they can use, especially if they're doing time-lapse photography. And so they can always line up that background. I just happen to have this little handle of the tripod that I can line up each time. So lining up your exposures, that's all I'm doing. Makes me wish I didn't take quite so many. But you can never document too much, right? If you're a photographer, get every little step. Oh, I think this is where I was adding in the, let's see, yeah, the paper clips. I don't need any of those. I thought I got rid of them. So, let's get rid of those. Where do they start? First paper clip goes in there. So I'm going to go from that layer. Let's see. Let's mark it. That one's gone. Yeah, all the way to this layer. So I'm not going to bother lining up these that I don't need in the final storyboard anyway. This is why I erased all my frames, because when you change your layers, come on, and delete layers, it will mess with all your frames and will do odd things to them. So that's lined up. Now it's this one. Now you see, just between these two, everything up here shifted as these things got added, but the tripod didn't shift. So I'm trying to document what does change, and that rotation changed. So I'm always trying to line up the same thing to be truthful in my documentation. This is why it can be helpful to have the computer do it for you. But sometimes the computer does not do the best job. In this case, I think the computer did a fine job. I'm just doing my due diligence showing you all the different ways. So a big kind of twist there in the documentation. Huh. Which is kind of helpful because it shows more of that tripod base that I'm using to line up. And just with each shot, it looked like it traveled down a little bit and over. So remember, the one I have showing through all of these is at the very top. That's what's helping me line these all up. So they're all being held to the same measurement and the same standard. Because if you only compare them to the one directly before it, you can still end up having your images travel a little bit. And you see how much it's moved since the beginning. When it does that, that's because I'm leaning on the arrow keys a little too much, and it gets out of my control. So you just have to press them individually each time. To the left and up. Now I know some photographers that are so controlling that they'll always count the number of times they press it at the same magnification, so they're always matching the exact movement on their line.